The clink of crystal glasses, the low hum of conversation, and the faint scent of saffron and seared steak filled the air at Aveline, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. It was the kind of place where reservations were booked 3 months out, where diners arrived in sleek black cars, and where no one, not even the billionaire at table 6, looked twice at the price. Grant Whitaker sat alone at his corner table, a figure cut from glossy magazine covers and Forbes features. Sharp black suit, custom-tailored, wristwatch worth more than most people's annual salary, a phone glowing with international notifications he couldn't seem to silence. His dark hair, faintly touched with grey at the temples, was perfectly styled. His jawline, clean-shaven and chiseled, held the tension of a man used to holding entire empires on his shoulders. Yet tonight, even surrounded by Chicago's glittering skyline and luxury, Grant couldn't quiet the hollow echo in his chest. He swirled the untouched whiskey in his glass, eyes flicking to the financial report glowing on his phone. Numbers blurred together. Fourth quarter projections, overseas contracts, a looming European merger that would push his net worth into the stratosphere. And yet, a strange heaviness pressed against his ribs. He had everything he'd ever wanted: wealth, power, a company with his name on the tower. But why did it all feel so thin? His assistant Dinah had warned him earlier that day, her sharp voice softened with rare concern. "You're burning out, Grant. Maybe take the night off, just once." He'd brushed her off, like always. Nights off were for men who had already conquered the world. He was still building, still climbing, but even Grant couldn't ignore the creeping sensation that somewhere along the way, the victories had lost their flavor. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple, and didn't notice the small figures approaching his table until a soft voice cut through the noise. "Would you like to buy a flower, sir?" Grant blinked, startled, and looked down. 2 little girls stood at the edge of his table. Twins, maybe 6 years old, bundled in thin jackets far too light for Chicago's biting December cold. One wore a pink ribbon, the other blue. Their cheeks were flushed, their fingers gripping a plastic bucket filled with wilted roses. Big eyes, startlingly blue, vivid against their brown hair, stared up at him with a mix of hope and quiet nerves. For a moment, Grant's first instinct was irritation. This was not the kind of place for street children. Where were their parents? Why were they out so late, hustling flowers in the cold? He set down his glass carefully, frowning. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice firm but not unkind. The girl with the pink ribbon spoke first. "Our mom is in the hospital." The words were simple, bare, and they sliced through him like a knife. Grant's breath caught. He looked closer now, really seeing them. The trembling fingers, the thin sweaters, the anxious shift of their feet on the polished floor. Something tugged sharply in his chest. He reached for his wallet, pulling out a $100 bill. Quick solution, his mind supplied automatically. Pay, dismiss, return to his world of deals and deadlines. But then he looked at their eyes again. Those eyes. His heart stuttered. He knew those eyes. Grant stood abruptly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "Wait," he said, his voice low, urgent. "What's your mother's name?" The girls exchanged glances, hesitant. Then the one with the blue ribbon whispered, "Emily. Emily Reyes." The restaurant noise faded. Grant felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Emily Reyes. The name hit him like a blow to the chest. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 6 years, not since the night she'd walked out of his life, vanishing without explanation. No calls, no letters, no trace. He'd buried her memory under work, under success, under every glittering thing he could pile atop the aching emptiness she'd left behind. And now, here were 2 little girls who bore her name, And his eyes. Grant's throat tightened. He shoved a hand through his hair, barely noticing when the girl shrank back slightly from the intensity in his expression. "Where is she?" he asked hoarsely. "What hospital?" They told him. Without hesitation, without thinking, Grant grabbed his coat, nearly forgot his phone, and strode out of the restaurant, heart pounding in a rhythm no quarterly report had ever stirred. As his driver pulled the car into motion, Grant sat in the back seat, staring out at the city lights blurring past. His reflection glimmered faintly in the window. Sharp suit, steely gaze, perfect posture. But for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the man in the glass. He was thinking about the woman he had lost. And two little girls who looked too much like him to be coincidence. For the first time in a very long time, Grant Whitaker realized there were things in this world money couldn't fix, and he was terrified of what he might find when he walked through those hospital doors. The sliding glass doors hissed open, letting Grant step into the hospital's quiet, sterile world. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something harder to name, tiredness, maybe, or loss. His polished shoes clicked against the tile floor as he crossed the lobby, his long coat trailing behind him. He approached the front desk with the confidence of a man used to being listened to. "Emily Reyes," he said, voice clipped, controlled. "What room is she in?" The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, glanced up, startled by the sharpness in his tone. She tapped at her computer, her brow furrowing. "Are you family?" Grant hesitated, his mouth opened, then closed. "Family?" After a beat, he cleared his throat and forced a tight smile. "I'm here to help." "Please." She studied him for a moment, then nodded, scribbled a number on a sticky note and handed it over. "Visiting hours are almost over, sir." "I won't be long." Grant's legs carried him down the dim hallway before his brain caught up. "Room 416. He repeated it silently, the numbers thrumming in his head like a drumbeat. He wasn't sure what he'd find, or what he'd say. 6 years. That's how long it had been since Emily had disappeared from his life, slipping away like smoke between his fingers. He had tried at first to find her, but work devoured him. Deals and deadlines pulled him under, and eventually even the sharpest grief dulled into something he could bury under success. But now it was all cracking open. He stopped in front of the door, hand hovering over the handle. For a long second he just stood there, chest tight. His mind spun with the memory of her laugh, the way she used to challenge him, the night she left. No note, no explanation, just gone. With a deep breath, Grant pushed the door open. Inside, the room was softly lit by a lamp on the bedside table. The blinds were drawn, and the beeping of a monitor marked the quiet rhythm of life. Emily lay in the bed, her hair pulled back in a messy braid, her skin pale against the hospital sheets. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, but unmistakably her. Her eyes flickered open, dazed, then widened as they landed on him. "Grant?" Her voice was a dry whisper. He swallowed hard, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Hi, Emily." She struggled to sit up, grimacing. He instinctively moved forward, hands half raised to help, but she held up a shaky hand. What are you doing here?" For a second, the old familiar sharpness was there in her voice, a flicker of steel under the exhaustion. "I saw them," he said quietly. Her brow furrowed. "2 little girls," Grant continued, his throat tightening, "selling flowers outside a restaurant." Emily's eyes fluttered shut. She let out a slow, pained breath. "I told them not to go that far. They said your name." He took another step closer, voice cracking despite himself. "Emily Reyes. And then I saw them. Their eyes." He trailed off. He didn't have words for the storm that had erupted inside him. Emily opened her eyes again, glistening with tears now. "I didn't want you to find out like this." Grant's jaw tightened. "Then how was I supposed to find out? Or was I never supposed to know? A heavy silence filled the room. Emily looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of the blanket. When I found out I was pregnant, you were already on a plane to Tokyo. You were signing a $1 billion deal. You were unstoppable, Grant. And I kept thinking, if I told you, you'd come back. But out of obligation, and you'd hate me for it. Grant's heart pounded in his chest, his fists clenching. I thought I was protecting all of us, Emily whispered. Maybe I was wrong. He exhaled, long and shaky, dragging a hand through his hair. Are they mine? Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Yes. Grant staggered back a step, overwhelmed. His mind raced through years of missed birthdays, scraped knees he hadn't soothed, bedtime stories he hadn't read. I need to be part of their lives, he said, voice low but firm. I need to know for sure. I'll order a DNA test, just for the record, but Emily, I want to be there. Emily closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. It's not about the money, Grant. I know. He took a deep breath. It's about time. And I've already lost enough of it. For the first time, she looked at him fully, her expression raw, vulnerable. Outside the room, Grant could hear the faint sound of footsteps, the distant buzz of the hospital. Inside, everything narrowed to the space between them, past mistakes, old wounds, and something neither of them had dared hope for. The possibility of something unfinished, something still alive. I'll handle your hospital bills, he added quietly. Don't fight me on that. Emily gave a soft, bitter laugh. You're still stubborn. Yeah, Grant said, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. I am. He took a long look at her, memorizing her face, the way her hair curled slightly at the temples, the faint crease between her brows. I'll be back tomorrow, he promised softly. And for the first time in years, Grant Whitaker walked away from something not for profit, not for control, but because his heart was no longer letting him walk away from what mattered. Outside, the city lights blinked in the winter dark, and Grant knew, without doubt, that his life was about to change in ways no deal or fortune ever could. Grant stood at the hospital entrance, his breath misting in the cold night air. His driver waited at the curb, the car engine humming softly, but Grant couldn't make himself move toward it. He stuffed his hands into the pockets of his coat and stared up at the dark sky, feeling something shift deep inside him. 6 years. 6 years of contracts, headlines, company takeovers, late-night flights. 6 years of burying Emily's memory so far under ambition, he thought he'd never have to face it again. And now he knew he had 2 daughters, his daughters. Grant exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. He didn't even know them, Maya and Eliza. 2 small girls with bright blue eyes, his eyes, and smiles that had cracked something open in him the second they looked up at his table. And Emily. He clenched his jaw, the old ache stirring. She'd left him without a word. She'd stolen 6 years from him, and yet, when he saw her lying there in that hospital bed, fragile but still fierce, all the old anger tangled with something messier, guilt, longing, confusion. Why hadn't she told him? Why hadn't he looked harder? Grant took one last breath of the icy night air, then climbed into the back seat of the car. Home, he murmured to the driver. But as the city blurred past the windows, his mind was already turning. Tomorrow, he'd return. Not out of obligation. Not out of guilt, but because for the first time in years he wanted something he couldn't buy, negotiate, or conquer. He wanted them. He wanted her. The next morning, Emily sat propped up in bed, a blanket draped around her shoulders, watching Maya and Eliza scribble on coloring books at the foot of the hospital bed. Her body ached, her head was foggy, but her heart pounded at every little sound outside the room. She hadn't slept much, not after Grant had walked in the night before, larger than life, eyes blazing with questions and wounds she hadn't wanted to reopen. God, he looked good. Sharper, older, yes, but with that same magnetic pull that had drawn her in all those years ago. She'd tried so hard not to imagine this moment, not to let herself wonder what would happen if he found out. And now, here they were. "Mama!" Maya tugged at her sleeve. Emily forced a smile. "Yes, baby." "Will the flower man come back?" Eliza asked, her voice soft, hopeful. Emily's chest tightened. Before she could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. Her heart jumped. Grant. He stepped inside with quiet confidence, carrying a small paper bag and 2 bright stuffed animals poking out from under his arm. He offered Emily a cautious smile. "I thought they might like these." The girls lit up, scrambling off the bed and running to him with delighted squeals. Emily watched, her throat tightening, as Grant knelt awkwardly, handing them each a toy. His careful businessman's hands fumbled with the crinkly wrapping, but the girls didn't care. "Mama, look!" Maya cried, holding up a bright pink bear. Eliza clutched hers tightly, looking up at Grant with shy wonder. "Thank you." Grant cleared his throat, his voice unexpectedly soft. "You're welcome." Emily let out a slow breath, folding her arms across her chest as she watched the scene. He was good with them, clumsy, sure, but good, and that terrified her. Because she'd spent so long building walls to keep this moment from happening, telling herself she was enough, that the girls didn't need him, that it was better this way. Now, with one simple visit, he was weaving himself into their lives, and she didn't know if her heart, or theirs, could survive if he walked away again. Later, when the girls were down the hall with a nurse, Grant pulled a chair close to Emily's bed. "Emily," he said quietly, "I need to know why." Her eyes darted away. "I told you last night." "No," he interrupted gently. "You told me you thought I'd resent you, that I was too busy, too ambitious, but you didn't even give me the chance to prove you wrong." Her jaw tightened. "I should have looked harder," Grant admitted. "I should have found you, but you didn't even tell me you were pregnant. That's not just about protecting yourself." Emily closed her eyes, her hands curling into the blanket. "You don't understand. You were unstoppable, Grant. I was terrified you'd come back out of guilt, marry me out of guilt, stay out of guilt, and you'd resent us all." Grant leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, eyes locked on hers. "You don't get to decide how I would have felt." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back stubbornly. "Well, you're here now, and I don't know what you expect, Grant. To just step into their lives? Fix everything with toys and money?" He flinched, shaking his head. "No. I know this isn't something I can fix overnight, but I'm not walking away." Emily stared at him, her chest tightening. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man sitting in front of her wasn't the same man who once disappeared into boardrooms and billion-dollar dreams. But her heart was bruised and cautious, and she knew, even if the girls fell for him instantly, she couldn't afford to. Outside the room, Dana's voice crackled through Grant's phone, left on silent in his coat pocket. "Grant, you need to call me back. The Paris deal's slipping. Investors are asking why you missed the call this morning. You can't just disappear." But for the first time in years, Grant wasn't watching his phone. He was watching a woman who had once held his heart, and 2 little girls who already had it now. And everything in him knew. This time, he couldn't afford to walk away. Grant sat alone in his apartment that night. The city stretched beneath him like a glittering map of ambition, wealth, and power. But tonight, none of it felt like his. He held the DNA results in his hand, the paper crisp and clinical, the words clear. 99.99% probability of paternity. Maya and Eliza were his daughters. He let the paper fall to the coffee table, sinking back into the leather couch. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything he had missed pressing down on his chest. Birthday candles, bedtime stories. Tiny scraped knees, and Emily. He closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. Tomorrow, he would go back to the hospital. Tomorrow, he would show up, not as Grant Whitaker, CEO, but as a father. God, that word felt foreign in his mouth. but he was determined to make it real. The next morning, Emily was sitting up in bed looking stronger, though the shadows under her eyes were still dark. Maya and Eliza were sprawled on the floor nearby, giggling softly as they colored. Grant knocked softly on the open door before stepping inside. He carried a small paper bag in one hand. "Hi," he said, his voice gentle, cautious. "I brought muffins." The girls squealed and ran to him, wrapping small arms around his legs. The sheer force of their affection hit him square in the chest, and for a moment, all he could do was kneel and pull them close, breathing in the warm, messy scent of childhood. Emily watched them quietly, her arms folded loosely across her lap. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice measured, wary. Grant stood slowly, meeting her gaze. "I wanted to." He sat down in the chair beside her bed, running a hand through his hair. "The DNA test came back," he said softly. "I know you didn't need it to know, but I did." Emily nodded once, her eyes flickering with something he couldn't read. "And now?" Grant let out a long breath. "Now I want to be part of their lives." He looked at her, really looked at her. "And yours, if you'll let me." The room went still. Emily swallowed, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "Grant, it's not that simple." "I know," he said quietly. "But I'm not going to walk away. Not this time." Later that afternoon, Dana called. Grant stood in the hospital hallway, his phone pressed to his ear, tension creeping back into his shoulders. "Grant," Dana's sharp voice cut through, "the Paris deal is slipping. You've missed 2 key meetings. Investors are nervous. You can't just disappear." "I know," Grant murmured, running a hand over his face. "I'm serious," Dana pressed. "You built this empire and now you're off the grid. You need to get back in the game before someone else takes control." Grant closed his eyes, feeling the familiar pull, the lure of the deal, the adrenaline of the next big win. But when he opened them, he saw through the window. Maya and Eliza laughing, their little heads bent over a game. Emily smiling faintly, watching them, her expression soft and tired. And something inside him shifted. "I'll call you back," he said, ending the call. Inside, Emily raised an eyebrow as he re-entered the room. "Work emergency?" Grant gave a small, rueful smile. "You could say that." Emily hesitated, then asked softly, "Why are you really here, Grant?" He moved to the chair beside her again, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Because I've spent my entire life chasing things that don't matter as much as I thought they did. And when I saw those girls standing at my table, it was like everything I've been missing hit me all at once." Emily's eyes softened, but her voice stayed cautious. "And when the next deal comes, the next billion-dollar acquisition, what happens then?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I want to figure it out. With you." Emily's breath caught, her guard slipping for just a heartbeat. Then the girls were there again, climbing into his lap, chattering about their game, their drawings, the nurse who let them have an extra cookie. Grant laughed softly, wrapping an arm around each of them. And as Emily watched, something in her heart cracked open, just a little. Because maybe, just maybe, this was a man who could learn to stay. The soft clang of a grocery cart echoed through the narrow aisles of Emily's neighborhood market. Grant followed behind her, awkwardly steering the cart, his designer shoes far out of place among the scuffed linoleum floors and humming refrigerators. Emily reached for a box of cereal, store brand on sale, and tossed it into the cart. Grant stared at it, brow furrowed. "They like that one?" Emily gave him a sideways glance. "They don't complain." He hesitated, then added a box of some cartoon-covered, sugar-packed cereal. She arched an eyebrow. "For variety," he murmured, looking sheepish. Emily smothered a smile. It was the first time they'd been out together like this, not in a hospital room or under the watchful eyes of nurses. Grant had insisted on helping now that she was back home, recovering. She'd reluctantly agreed, but now, walking side by side through the cramped aisles, she felt the tension humming between them. Not the tension of a fight, something more delicate, more uncertain. As if they were walking on a bridge neither of them knew how to cross. Maya and Eliza darted ahead, giggling and chasing each other. Grant watched them with an expression Emily couldn't quite decipher, something between wonder and regret. "They're fearless," he murmured. "They're 6, Emily said softly. He chuckled under his breath, and for a moment they shared a look. An old familiarity flickering to life between them. But just as quickly, the past slid between them again. Emily reached for a can of soup and cleared her throat. "So, how's your work?" Grant tensed, his jaw tightening. "It's fine." "Busy." She gave him a measured look. "You don't have to downplay it. I saw your name in the paper last week." "Some billion-dollar deal overseas?" Grant rubbed the back of his neck. "That deal, it's complicated." Emily frowned slightly. "Complicated how?" He hesitated, then exhaled. "The board wants me in Paris next week. For months, maybe. They're pushing hard." Emily's stomach twisted. There it was. The world she'd always known would pull him away. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, forcing herself to focus on the cans in front of her. "And what are you going to do?" "I don't know," Grant admitted quietly. "For the first time in my life, I really don't know." Emily turned to face him fully, the grocery shelves looming around them. "Grant, I need to be honest with you." He met her gaze, his blue eyes steady. "I can't have you come in and out of their lives," she said softly but firmly. "If you're going to be here, be here. If you're going to choose work, then—" She swallowed hard. "Then let's figure out what that looks like now, before they get too attached." Grant's chest tightened. He hadn't expected this conversation. Not here, not like this. But he couldn't blame her. She had protected herself and their daughters all these years. She had every right to question whether he could truly stay. He reached out slowly, gently, and brushed his fingers along her wrist. A touch so light she could have pulled away, but she didn't. "I don't want to run anymore," he said quietly. "Not from you, not from them." Emily's breath caught, but before she could respond, a new voice sliced through the moment. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Emily stiffened. Grant turned, his brow furrowing, to see a woman standing near the end of the aisle. A petite brunette with sharp eyes and a smirk curling her lips. "Marcy," Emily said tightly. Marcy crossed her arms, her gaze sweeping over Grant with thinly veiled skepticism. "So, you're the infamous Grant Whitaker." Grant extended a hand politely. "Marcy, I assume?" She shook it, brisk and cool. "I'm the one who helped hold this family together while you were off conquering the world." Grant's mouth tightened, but he nodded. "I appreciate that." Marcy tilted her head. "Do you?" Emily placed a calming hand on her sister's arm. "Marcy, not now." But Marcy shook her head. "No, I need to say this. Grant, you may have money and charm, but you don't just stroll in here and play daddy because you feel like it. These girls deserve stability. Emily deserves stability. So, forgive me if I don't jump to believe you're here for the right reasons. The words hit harder than Grant expected. But instead of bristling, he let them settle, let the truth of them press into his chest. "I know," he said quietly. "You're right to question me. But I'm not here to prove anything to you, Marcy. I'm here for them. For Emily. For the girls. And if it takes time, if it takes patience, then fine. I'm not going anywhere." Marcy studied him, eyes narrowing. Emily exhaled, tension rippling through her shoulders. She gave her sister a small, weary look. "Marcy, please." After a long pause, Marcy sighed and stepped back. "Fine, but I'm watching you, Whitaker." Grant gave a small, wry smile. "I'd expect nothing less." Later, after the groceries were unpacked and the girls were tucked in for a nap, Emily stood beside Grant at the kitchen counter, her fingers idly tracing the edge of a coffee mug. "You handled Marcy better than I expected," she murmured. Grant chuckled softly. "She reminds me of my assistant, Dana. Sharp, no patience for nonsense." Emily smiled faintly, but then her expression grew serious. "Grant, this isn't just about showing up once or twice. It's about showing up every day." He reached out, covering her hand with his. "I know, and I'm ready to try." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the city buzzed with life. But inside this small apartment, it was just them. Two people with a tangle of history between them, standing on the edge of something they didn't yet know how to name. And for the first time, Grant didn't feel the pull of a boardroom or a billion-dollar deal. He felt the pull of home. Grant sat in the back of his car, staring blankly out the window as the city slid by. The skyline gleamed under the fading winter sun, glass towers reflecting fire-orange light into the streets below. His phone buzzed against his thigh, a silent, insistent reminder. He sighed and picked it up. 14 missed calls, mostly from Dana. He scrolled through the messages. "Dana, Grant, the Paris board is getting anxious. We need you in the strategy session tomorrow." Dana, "The investors are asking if you're still committed to this merger." Dana, "You can't ignore this deal. It's a once-in-a-lifetime acquisition." Once in a lifetime. Grant let out a slow, measured breath, his thumb hovering over the phone screen. It was what he'd always wanted, wasn't it? Another empire to add to his name, another billion-dollar win, another headline. But when he closed his eyes, all he saw were two little girls giggling as they braided his hair awkwardly on the living room floor. He saw Emily, curling up under a blanket on the couch, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but still watching him with quiet wariness. And for the first time, he felt the sharp edge of his ambition, not as a triumph, but as a cost. A cost he wasn't sure he wanted to pay anymore. Emily stirred the pot on the stove, the scent of simmering soup filling the apartment. She felt Grant's presence before she even heard him step into the kitchen. "You're late," she said softly, glancing over her shoulder. "I stopped by the office." She arched an eyebrow. "Big deal?" He ran a hand through his hair, a tension knotting in his shoulders she knew all too well. "Big offer," he admitted. "They want me in Paris next week, for months." Emily set down the spoon and turned fully to face him, arms crossed loosely over her chest. "And? I don't know if I want to go." That surprised her. "You're Grant Whitaker," she said quietly. "You've built your entire life on being unstoppable. I'm starting to wonder if unstoppable just means lonely." Their eyes met across the small, worn kitchen, a world apart from his sleek penthouse, his polished boardrooms, his gleaming towers of glass and steel. "Emily, I've been running for so long," he continued, his voice rough. "I don't know how to stop, but I want to, I want to try. Emily's heart ached. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But belief didn't come easily to her anymore. Not after years of carrying the weight alone. They'll forgive you if you walk away, she said softly. The board, the investors, the press, they'll move on. But if you walk away from us... Her voice broke, and she looked down, blinking hard. They won't, she finished quietly. The girls won't. Grant took a slow step closer, his hands curling slightly at his sides, as if he wanted to reach for her, but didn't. I don't want to walk away, he said simply. For a long moment they just stood there, the air thick between them. Finally, Emily let out a shaky breath. I need to put the girls to bed. She brushed past him gently, and for the first time, he let her go without chasing after her, because he knew this wasn't a problem he could fix in a single conversation. That night, after the girls were asleep, Emily sat on the couch, folding small socks and tiny pajamas into neat piles. Grant sat across from her, his phone buzzing on the table between them. He ignored it. Emily watched him for a moment, then spoke quietly. You don't have to give up everything, Grant. He looked up, meeting her eyes. But you can't have everything either. He let out a hollow laugh. That's the first time anyone said that to me in years. Well, Emily said softly, you're not the same man you were years ago. That startled him. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, her phone buzzed sharply. She picked it up, frowning, reading a text, and then her face paled. What is it? Grant asked quickly. Emily swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the phone. The landlord. Rent's going up next month. Grant sat forward instinctively. I'll cover it. No. She cut him off gently but firmly. You can't solve this with money, Grant. You can't just drop in as the rescuer. He pulled back slightly, a flicker of hurt crossing his face. I'm not trying to rescue you, he said quietly. I'm trying to be part of this. Emily's shoulders softened. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. I know, she whispered. I'm just scared. Grant rose slowly, stepping closer, and this time, when he reached out, he brushed his hand along her arm, lingering just a second longer. So am I, he murmured. And in that small, vulnerable moment, something shifted between them, not resolved, not finished, but cracked open. For the first time in years, they were both standing in the same place, and neither one was ready to walk away. Emily sat at the small kitchen table the next morning, a cup of tea cradled between her palms. The steam curled upward, fogging the window as faint winter light spilled in. She watched the girls giggle on the floor, sorting through their crayons, and felt the pull of old, familiar exhaustion mixed with something newer, a sharp undercurrent of worry. Grant had left late the night before, promising he'd return in the morning. She wasn't sure she believed him. He was a man who lived in skyscrapers, not cramped apartments. A man who moved in boardrooms, not in the mess of children's toys and overdue bills. She sipped her tea and forced herself not to check the clock. Across town, Grant Whitaker adjusted the cuffs of his shirt and stared at his reflection. He should have been in a meeting. Dana had left him 5 increasingly urgent voicemails, reminding him that his absence was creating waves. The Paris deal, the investors, the media circling with rumors. But all Grant could think about was the look on Emily's face last night when she said, "You can't just drop in as the rescuer." He'd spent his whole life rescuing things, companies, contracts, high-stakes deals. This wasn't something he could fix with a pen stroke. This was about showing up, about staying, He grabbed his coat and keys. When he arrived at Emily's apartment, Marcy was already there. She opened the door with a scowl. "Oh, it's you." Grant gave her a tight smile. "Good morning to you too." She stepped aside reluctantly. "She's in the kitchen." Inside, Emily looked up in surprise as he entered, the girls squealing with excitement. Maya ran to him, wrapping her small arms around his legs. Eliza followed, beaming up at him with a wide, toothy grin. His heart squeezed. "Hey, munchkins," he murmured, crouching to their level. Emily stood, brushing a stray hair from her face, a faint smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "You came back." "I said I would." Before she could respond, Marcy crossed her arms. "I need to talk to you," she said firmly, tilting her head toward the hallway. Emily gave her sister a warning look, but Grant held up a hand. "It's fine." He followed Marcy to the narrow hallway, where she fixed him with a sharp, measuring stare. "I know you think you're doing the right thing," Marcy began, her voice low but fierce. "But you can't just stroll back into their lives, play dad for a few weeks, and then disappear when work calls you back to Paris, or Hong Kong, or wherever you run off to next." Grant met her gaze squarely. "I know." Marcy's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly not expecting agreement. "I know I've missed years I can't get back," Grant continued quietly. "But I'm here now. I don't want to walk away." Marcy tilted her head, her expression softening just a fraction. "Prove it." Grant let out a slow breath. "I intend to." That afternoon, Grant offered to take the girls to the park while Emily rested. She hesitated, clearly torn, but after a gentle nudge from Marcy, she agreed. At the park, Grant trailed behind the girls as they raced ahead, their laughter cutting through the chilly air. He felt unsteady, out of his element, a man used to polished offices, not playground wood chips. But when Eliza tripped and skinned her knee, he was suddenly right there, scooping her up gently. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured, brushing away her tears. "I've got you." Eliza buried her face against his chest, her tiny fingers clutching his coat. Grant felt something crack deep in his chest, something he hadn't even realized was tightly sealed. He wasn't thinking about Paris. He wasn't thinking about numbers or deals or deadlines. He was thinking about this small, brave girl in his arms. And how he wanted to be the one she ran to, again and again. Back at the apartment, Emily watched from the window as Grant returned, the girls clinging to his hands, their cheeks flushed with cold. Her heart ached with a complicated mix of hope and fear. She wanted to believe this wasn't temporary, that Grant wasn't going to slip back into his old life, leaving them behind. But she knew how easily work had claimed him before. When Grant stepped inside, shaking snow from his shoulders, he met her gaze across the room. "I cancelled my flight to Paris," he said softly. Emily's eyes widened. "The board isn't happy," he added with a small, wry smile. "But they'll survive. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in a long time, Emily let herself believe it. Just a little. The soft hum of Emily's apartment filled Grant's ears that evening. The quiet murmur of the television in the background, the faint rattle of dishes as Emily tidied up, the girls' giggles drifting from their room. He sat at the kitchen table, elbows on his knees, watching the soft glow under the girls' door as they settled in for bed. His phone vibrated on the table. Again, Paris. Dana's name flashed on the screen, the 15th missed call today. Grant ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. He could almost hear Dana's voice in his head. "This is your moment, Grant. This deal cements your legacy. You walk away now, and you're signaling weakness." He had never been a man to back away from the game. Until now. Emily emerged from the girl's room, her face tired but soft with that quiet, motherly peace. She stopped when she saw him, leaning slightly against the doorframe. "You're still here," she said quietly, her voice a little surprised, a little hopeful. Grant gave a small, crooked smile. "I told you. I'm not going anywhere." She watched him carefully, crossing her arms. "I know how hard it is for you to sit still, Grant. To choose this over everything else." He stood slowly, stepping toward her. "It's harder," he admitted, "but it's also the first time it's felt like the right kind of hard." Emily swallowed, her throat tightening. "You say that now. But what about in a week or a month? What about when the press starts poking around and investors start questioning your choices?" As if summoned, Grant's phone buzzed again. Emily's eyes flicked to it, then back to him. He met her gaze and, deliberately, reached over and turned the phone face down. Emily gave a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. "I never thought I'd see you do that." Grant smiled faintly, stepping closer, his voice lowering. "Neither did I." But later that night, as Grant slipped out to grab coffee and fresh groceries, he saw them, the cluster of photographers waiting by his car. They pounced the moment they spotted him, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. "Grant, who's the woman you've been spending time with? Are the rumors true? You're stepping down from Whitaker Global? Is this about the children? Are they yours?" Grant froze. His chest tightened, and for a split second the old instinct surged. Smooth over, control the narrative, lock it down before it spun out of control. But then he thought of Maya's tiny hand wrapped in his this morning. Eliza's shy smile. Emily's quiet, hopeful eyes. And something inside him hardened. He shook his head firmly, ignoring the reporters, pushing through them without a word, his jaw set. When he returned, Emily was waiting by the window, her face pale. "I saw," she said quietly. "They're already talking about it online." Grant exhaled, setting the groceries on the counter. "I'm sorry. I should have expected it." Emily's arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Grant, the girls, they're not ready for this kind of attention." "I'm not ready." He closed the distance between them, his voice soft but firm. "I will protect them. I will protect you." She let out a shaky breath, eyes glistening. "You don't understand, Grant. This isn't just a bad headline or a rough quarter. This is our life. Our privacy. If you're going to bring this world into ours, you have to be sure." He reached out, gently taking her hands in his. "I am sure." Emily's fingers trembled in his, her guard still half raised, her heart torn between longing and fear. "I want to believe you," she whispered, "but I can't survive you walking away again." Grant's heart clenched. He tightened his hold, his voice thick. "I'm not walking away." The next morning, Grant made the call. He stood in the corner of Emily's living room, phone pressed to his ear, listening as Dana's voice crackled through. "Grant, are you out of your mind? Do you know what you're throwing away?" Grant closed his eyes. "I know exactly what I'm choosing." Dana went quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Then I hope you're ready to fight for it." Grant hung up and turned to see Emily standing quietly in the doorway, watching him. For the first time, there was no skepticism in her eyes, only a fragile, flickering trust. And for Grant, that was worth more than every billion-dollar deal he'd ever chased. Emily sat alone on the couch, folding small socks and tiny shirts into a neat pile. The television hummed softly in the background, but she wasn't watching it. Her mind was far away, back to Grant's words from the night before, the way his voice had thickened when he said, "I'm not walking away." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But her heart was tired, and trust wasn't something she could hand over like a cup of coffee or a folded sweater. She heard the front door creak open and looked up sharply. Grant stepped in, his broad shoulders slightly hunched, his expression tight. Emily's stomach sank. "What happened?" Grant ran a hand through his hair. "I just came from the board." Her chest tightened. "They're threatening to pull me out," he said quietly, sinking into the armchair across from her. "They think I've gone soft, that I'm distracted." Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "Are they wrong?" Grant's eyes met hers, tired, searching. "No." For a moment, they just sat there, the unspoken truth stretching between them like a wire pulled too tight. Emily let out a slow breath. "Grant, I never wanted to cost you your life's work." "You didn't," he said quickly. "I chose this." But she shook her head. "You're still choosing, Grant. You're in the middle of it right now." His jaw tightened. "I've walked away from deals before, Emily, but I've never walked away from you. Not really." Emily's throat caught. "You walked away when you chose work over everything else." Grant leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low. "You walked away too, Emily. You didn't tell me. You decided for me." Her breath hitched, tears suddenly prickling at her eyes. "I was scared," she whispered. "You were already gone, Grant. Even when you were in the room, you were somewhere else. I didn't want to raise two little girls wondering if their father really loved them, or if he was just there because he was supposed to be." Grant let the words hit him full force. He closed his eyes for a long moment, then exhaled shakily. "I can't change who I was," he said softly. "But I can decide who I'm going to be now." Emily's shoulders sagged slightly, her walls softening even as her heart pounded in her chest. "I need to know you mean that, for real. Not just this week, not just because it's new and you feel guilty." Grant rose, crossing the room slowly, and knelt in front of her. "I'm not here because I feel guilty," he murmured. "I'm here because when I saw those little girls standing at my table, selling flowers, looking at me like they didn't even know who I was, something inside me broke." Emily's breath caught, her eyes shining. "I'm here because I don't want to miss another birthday, another scraped knee, another bedtime story," Grant continued, his voice shaking. "I'm here because I want them to know, to really know, that I'm their father, and I'm not going anywhere." Emily reached out slowly, her fingers brushing his cheek, trembling. "You're asking me to believe in something I stopped believing in a long time ago," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly, "but I'll earn it, Emily." One day at a time. Later that night, as the girls slept soundly in their room, Emily and Grant sat side by side on the couch. The TV was off, the room softly lit by the street lamp outside the window. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then Emily broke the silence, her voice soft. "Marcy's worried you're going to leave." Grant smiled faintly. "Marcy doesn't scare me." Emily gave a small laugh, shaking her head. "She should." He turned to her, his expression turning serious. "Are you worried I'm going to leave?" She hesitated, her eyes searching his face. "I'm worried you'll wake up one morning and realize you missed the man you were." That you'll resent this life, us, because it's smaller, messier, less shiny than what you're used to. Grant exhaled slowly, resting his forearms on his knees. It is smaller and messier, and I don't care. Emily blinked back sudden tears. I want a life where I'm here, Grant murmured. Where I'm yours. Where I'm theirs. Emily reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly, her voice barely a whisper. Then don't just tell me, Grant. Show me. The next morning, the headlines hit. Billionaire CEO, Grant Whitaker. Steps back from Paris deal. Family ties to blame. Exclusive. Secret heirs discovered. Who is Emily Reyes? Emily's phone buzzed non-stop as friends, old co-workers, and even strangers reached out. Grant's phone rang with board members, investors, reporters. The world was crashing in. But when Emily looked up from her phone, heart hammering, she saw Grant standing in the kitchen, making pancakes with the girls, laughing as Maya dumped too many chocolate chips into the batter. And for the first time, she let herself believe, just a little, that maybe, just maybe, he was here to stay. Grant sat on the edge of Emily's worn couch, his elbows resting on his knees, staring blankly at the muted television across the room. The news ticker ran across the bottom of the screen, his name flashing in bold. Grant Whitaker under fire. Boardroom shakeups. Public scrutiny over family drama. His phone, face down on the coffee table, buzzed for the 100th time. Emily came out of the girls' room, closing the door softly behind her. She crossed the living room quietly, watching him. Grant? She asked gently, sitting down beside him. He didn't look at her at first, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded. They want me out, he said quietly. Emily's breath caught. The board? He nodded. They're calling an emergency meeting. They think I'm distracted, weak. They're worried the company will take a hit because the CEO suddenly grew a conscience. Emily reached for his hand, but he didn't lift his gaze. I built that company from the ground up, he murmured. I sacrificed everything for it. And now they're telling me I'm not good enough to keep it. His voice cracked faintly, surprising even himself. Emily's heart ached. She had seen Grant command rooms, dazzle investors, close deals with a coolness that could make anyone shiver. But now he was just a man on the edge of losing the only identity he'd ever known. I don't want you to lose everything because of us, Emily whispered. That made Grant look up sharply, his eyes glinting. You are not everything I'm losing, Emily. You're everything I didn't know I was missing. Her breath hitched, her eyes shining. But before she could respond, his phone buzzed again. Insistent, sharp. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. They want an answer by tomorrow. Emily hesitated. What are you going to do? Grant let out a long, shaky breath, pressing his hands together. I don't know. For the first time, she saw the cracks in his armor, and it scared her, because she knew he was standing at a crossroads, and no one could choose this path for him. Later that night, Emily stood in the kitchen, washing dishes slowly, her mind spinning. Marcy leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her. He's going to leave, Marcy said softly. Emily shook her head, her throat tight. You don't know that. Marcy's voice softened. Come on. He's a billionaire CEO. Do you really think he's going to choose this life over that one? Over everything he's built? Emily closed her eyes, feeling the sting of unshed tears. I don't know, she whispered, but I want to believe he will. Across the apartment, Grant sat in the girls' room, quietly watching them sleep. Maya clutched her stuffed bear, her small mouth slightly open, breathing softly. Eliza had kicked off her blanket, one tiny arm flung across the pillow. He felt something deep in his chest, a fierce, aching love that terrified him. He reached out, gently tucking the blanket back over Eliza's shoulder, his hand trembling slightly. "I can't lose this," he thought. "I can't lose them." But outside that door, the world was waiting. And it was a world that didn't forgive CEOs who hesitated. The next morning, Grant stood in front of the mirror, buttoning his shirt, his reflection pale and tight-lipped. Emily hovered in the doorway, watching him carefully. "Are you going to the meeting?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I have to." Emily stepped closer, her arms folding protectively across her chest. "Grant, whatever happens in that room, whatever you decide, just know that we'll be okay." His eyes snapped to hers. "I don't want you to just be okay, Emily. I want you to be with me." Her breath caught. "Then fight for us, Grant. Fight like you fight for everything else in your life." He swallowed hard, nodding. But as he stepped out into the cold morning air, his heart pounded in his chest. This was his moment, and he had never been more afraid. Grant sat at the long mahogany boardroom table, the weight of a dozen stares pressing into him. The board members were impeccably dressed, their eyes sharp, their smiles tight. Dana sat at the far end, her face pale but composed, glancing at him with something between sympathy and warning. "Grant," the chairman began, folding his hands calmly, "we need clarity." The room fell into a tense, expectant hush. "You've missed critical meetings, walked away from the Paris deal, and left the company exposed to months of uncertainty. Investors are nervous. We are nervous." Grant took a slow breath, feeling his heart pound against his ribs. The chairman continued, "We need to know if your personal situation is temporary, or if we should consider a leadership transition." Grant swallowed hard. For years, he had built this empire. Every deal, every sleepless night, every hard-won negotiation, all leading to this gleaming pinnacle of power. And now, they were asking him to choose work, or family, ambition, or love. He looked down at his hands, pressing his palms flat against the polished wood. And suddenly, he saw something unexpected. Maya's tiny fingers tangled in his yesterday morning, giggling as she tried to braid his hair. Eliza's shy, crooked smile as she handed him her drawing. Emily's eyes dark and uncertain, but slowly, bravely softening. He looked up. "I know what you want me to say," he said quietly. The board members exchanged glances. "You want me to promise I'll be back, that I'll put the company first, that this was just a temporary distraction." He let out a slow, measured breath. "But I can't promise you that." A murmur rippled around the table. Dana sat perfectly still, her eyes shining. "For years," Grant continued, "this company has been my entire life, and I'm proud of what we've built. But I've realized something in the last few weeks." He leaned forward, voice steady but raw. "Legacy isn't just profit margins or market expansion. It's what you leave behind when the lights go out. And right now, I've got 2 little girls who need a father. And a woman who trusted me once, and is trying to trust me again." His throat tightened, but he didn't look away. "So I'm stepping back," he said softly. "Effective immediately." Silence crashed into the room like a wave. Dana exhaled, her lips curving into the faintest, proudest smile. The chairman cleared his throat. "Grant, be reasonable." "We can restructure." "No," Grant interrupted gently but firmly. "You don't need me here. You'll survive without me." "But they, Emily, Maya, Eliza, they can't wait. And I won't make them wait anymore." He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket, his heart hammering in his chest. For the first time in his life, walking away didn't feel like failure. It felt like freedom. An hour later, Grant stood outside Emily's apartment building, staring up at the windows that glowed softly in the winter dusk. His breath puffed into the cold air, his hands trembling slightly as he knocked on the door. Emily opened it cautiously, her eyes wide, her face pale. "Grant?" she whispered. "What happened?" He stepped inside, his chest tight, his throat raw. "I left," he said softly. "I walked away from the company." Emily's lips parted in shock. "You? What?" "I left," he repeated, a faint, amazed laugh slipping out. "For you, for the girls, for us." She reached out slowly, her hand trembling as it touched his arm. "Grant," she murmured, her voice cracking. "Are you sure?" He covered her hand with his, pulling her in gently, his forehead resting against hers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Emily's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. She let herself lean into him, let herself believe, just for this moment, that maybe, just maybe, this man was ready to stay. In the other room, Maya and Eliza peeked around the corner, giggling softly. Emily smiled through her tears, her hand curling around Grant's. "Come on," she whispered, her voice shaking with laughter. "They're waiting for you." And as Grant followed her into the warmth of the tiny apartment, into the arms of his daughters, he felt the last pieces of his old life fall away, making room, finally, for the only thing that had ever truly mattered. The next morning, Grant woke to the sound of little feet pattering down the hallway and the faint scent of coffee brewing. For a moment, as sunlight crept across the room, he felt weightless. No urgent emails, no boardroom conference calls, no contracts waiting for his signature. Just the quiet thrum of family life, laughter from the kitchen, Emily's soft voice calling for the girls to sit still, the occasional clatter of a spoon dropped on the floor. He smiled, stretching slowly, but even as warmth filled his chest, a knot of uncertainty tugged beneath it. What did this new life look like, day after day? Who was he, without the constant hum of power at his fingertips? Without the boardrooms, headlines, and adrenaline rush of the next deal? He wasn't sure. And that scared him. In the kitchen, Emily poured coffee into 2 mugs, sneaking glances at the girls giggling over their breakfast. She heard Grant's slow footsteps and turned just as he appeared, rumpled but somehow more human without his tailored armor. "Morning," she murmured, offering him a cup. "Morning," he echoed softly, wrapping his hands around the mug like he needed the warmth as much as the caffeine. They stood, in a quiet, companionable pause, watching the girls. "Did you sleep?" Emily asked gently. Grant let out a slow breath. "Eventually." She tilted her head. "You're worried?" He met her eyes, offering a small, wry smile. "I'm terrified." Emily softened, stepping closer. "Of what?" He hesitated, his voice low. "Of not knowing who I am without all of it." Emily reached out carefully, resting her hand on his arm. "You're their father," she said quietly. That's who you are. Grant's throat tightened, emotions surging unexpectedly. I want to be, he whispered. I don't know if I know how. Later that afternoon, Marcy arrived, sharp-eyed and cautious as ever. Emily had invited her over, hoping to smooth things between the two of them, but the tension in the room was palpable. So, Marcy said coolly, folding her arms, you actually did it. Walked away from the golden throne. Grant gave a small, tired laugh. I did. Marcy arched a skeptical brow. And what now? What's the plan, Whitaker? Because let me tell you, Emily and those girls don't need a hero for one weekend. They need someone who's going to stay when it's boring and hard and messy. Grant nodded slowly. I know. Marcy blinked, clearly surprised by his lack of defensiveness. I know I can't fix everything overnight, he continued quietly. And I know I have a lot to prove. To Emily, to the girls, probably to you too. Marcy studied him carefully, her mouth pressing into a thin line. Then, after a long moment, she gave a small, grudging nod. Okay. Emily let out a quiet breath, grateful and a little stunned. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Grant and Emily sat side by side on the small couch, a blanket draped across their laps. The television was off, the apartment quiet except for the occasional creak of the old radiator. I keep waiting to wake up and realize this was all a dream, Emily murmured. Grant turned his head slightly, his eyes soft. Good dream or bad dream? She smiled faintly. Scary dream. He reached over, gently taking her hand. Emily, I know I let you down once. I know I missed so many moments I can't ever get back. But I'm here now, and I'm staying. Emily's eyes glistened. She squeezed his hand, her voice trembling. I want to believe you. Then let me show you, Grant whispered. She leaned in slowly, resting her head against his shoulder. For a long moment, they just sat there, not as a CEO and a woman who had once walked away, not as two people haunted by the past, but as something fragile and new, pieced together moment by moment. And for the first time, Grant felt the shape of a life he wanted more than any headline or empire. A life where love wasn't something he chased in the margins. It was the center. The following morning, Grant stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline as dawn crept over Chicago. The familiar view, glass towers glittering in the rising sun, the hum of early traffic, once filled him with a restless hunger. The world was out there, waiting to be conquered. But today, something inside him felt different. He didn't want to conquer anything. He wanted to belong. Emily's soft voice broke the quiet. You've been up for a while. Grant turned, offering a tired smile as she stepped into the room, wrapped in her robe, her hair still tousled from sleep. I've been thinking, he admitted, about what comes next. She gave him a careful, measured look. And? He let out a slow breath. I've spent my entire life building something I thought would make me happy. And maybe it did, for a while. But now? His eyes softened, his voice dipping. Now I realize I want something smaller, and much, much harder. Emily's throat tightened. You're talking about us. Grant crossed the room slowly, stopping just in front of her. I want to build this, Emily. With you. With the girls. She searched his face, heart pounding, memories of old wounds flaring. Grant, you're asking me to trust a version of you I've never seen before. I know. His hand reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "But let me show you. Not just today or tomorrow, every day." Emily blinked hard, emotion tightening her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe they could rewrite their story. But before she could speak, the sharp buzz of Grant's phone shattered the moment. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. "I should turn that off." But something in her, some old protective part, reached for the phone first. She glanced at the screen. Her expression tightened. "Dana." Grant's brows drew together. "What's wrong?" Emily hesitated. "She says the press is escalating. There's a leak. Details about the girls, about me. It's everywhere." Grant's stomach dropped. He took the phone, reading the brief, frantic message. His jaw clenched. "I have to fix this," he muttered. Emily's eyes flashed. "Grant!" But he was already reaching for his coat. "They're dragging you and the girls into this. I can't just stand here." She stepped in front of him, blocking the door. "Grant," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "What if you can't fix it?" He froze, blinking at her. "What if the only way through this isn't by throwing money or power at it?" Emily's eyes glistened. "What if it's by staying here right now and showing us that we matter more than the headlines?" Grant felt his chest tighten painfully. His every instinct screamed to jump into the storm, to control the narrative, to protect what mattered by doing. But Emily, strong, steady Emily, was asking him to do the one thing he had never known how to do. Stay. He let out a shaky breath, his hands curling slightly at his sides. "Emily," he whispered, "I don't know how to be that man." Her voice softened, her eyes tender. "Then let's figure it out together." For a long moment, they stood there, two people on the edge of a choice that would change everything. Finally, Grant reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "Okay," he said, his voice rough but sure. "Together." That night, Grant held Maya and Eliza close on the couch, reading them a bedtime story as Emily watched from the kitchen doorway. His phone buzzed again and again on the table, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he stayed with the girls, their small bodies curled against his sides, their eyes bright and sleepy. When he looked up and met Emily's gaze, something unspoken passed between them, a promise. Not the kind made in boardrooms or sealed with contracts, but the kind made, quietly and fiercely, in the heart. And this time, Grant intended to keep it. Spring arrived gently in Chicago, softening the sharp edges of winter, with shy bursts of green and the occasional glint of sun on the river. Emily stood at the window of their new home, a modest, cozy house on a quiet street, with a small backyard and a slightly crooked mailbox. She watched as Grant crouched on the grass, laughing as Maya tugged at his sleeve and Eliza proudly held up a slightly lopsided daisy crown. It was a scene she never imagined she would see. Grant Whitaker, the man once known for his ruthless business instincts, now patiently weaving flowers with his daughters on a Sunday afternoon. A knock at the door pulled her from the moment. Marcy stood on the porch, holding a bag of groceries, her face unusually soft. "You okay?" she asked, stepping inside. Emily smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think so." Marcy glanced toward the window, her eyes flicking to the scene outside. "He's really doing it, huh?" Emily let out a breath, folding her arms loosely. "Yeah, he is." Marcy studied her carefully. "Are you scared it's going to fall apart?" Emily hesitated, her eyes glistening. "Every day. But I'm also learning to let myself believe in the good moments when they come." Marcy smiled, setting the groceries on the counter. "Well, you're stronger than me." Outside, Grant scooped Eliza up, spinning her around as she squealed with delight. Maya ran circles around them, giggling wildly. When Emily stepped out onto the porch, Grant looked up, his face breaking into an easy, unguarded smile. She felt her heart squeeze. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a public declaration or a flashy gift. It was this, him, here, day after day, showing up. And that was worth everything. Later that evening, after the girls were tucked into bed, Emily found Grant in the kitchen, half focused on packing the girls' lunchboxes for school the next day. "You're putting cookies and a brownie in there?" she teased softly, leaning against the doorway. Grant grinned sheepishly. "They deserve a treat." Emily laughed, shaking her head as she crossed the room. "You're going to be the fun parent, aren't you?" "I'm trying," he murmured, pulling her gently into his arms. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing each other in. Then Grant pulled back slightly, his eyes serious. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, Emily, but I promise you, this isn't temporary. I'm in this for the long haul." Emily reached up, brushing a hand along his cheek, her voice trembling. "You already are." That weekend, Dana stopped by, a rare, casual visit without the sharp heels and crisp blazers. She and Grant sat on the porch, sipping coffee, watching the girls chalk pictures on the driveway. "I have to say," Dana murmured, a faint smile tugging at her lips, "you're calmer than I ever imagined you could be." Grant chuckled softly. "Calm is still a work in progress." She glanced at him, her eyes kind but knowing. "You miss it sometimes, don't you? The rush, the game, the power?" Grant considered that, looking out at the sunlit street, the sound of Eliza's giggles echoing through the air. "Sometimes," he admitted quietly, "but I wouldn't trade this for anything." Dana smiled, clinking her coffee mug lightly against his. "Good answer." That night, as Emily settled under the covers, Grant joined her, pulling the blanket up as he stretched out beside her. "You know," she murmured, resting her head on his chest, "I used to think you were a man who would never stop chasing something, that nothing would ever be enough for you." Grant's arm tightened around her. "Maybe I just didn't know what I was really chasing." She smiled softly, her eyes drifting closed. And in that quiet, contented moment, Grant realized something he never thought he'd feel. A peace that wasn't about winning or earning or proving. It was about being, about staying, about loving. The first warm day of May brought the whole neighborhood outside. Grant stood in the backyard, watching Maya and Eliza race through the freshly cut grass, their laughter rising into the soft breeze. Emily sat nearby on a picnic blanket, sunglasses perched on her nose, sipping iced tea as she smiled at the scene. Grant took a slow, contented breath. It was a simple afternoon. No billion-dollar contracts, no urgent meetings, no flashing headlines. And yet, standing there, he felt richer than he ever had. He had learned, finally, that power wasn't about control or wealth. It was about presence, about the hard, imperfect work of showing up every day, not as a CEO, not as a fixer, but as a father, a partner, a man who was willing to stay even when it was messy and small and quietly ordinary. Later that evening, after the girls were tucked into bed, Grant found Emily in the kitchen, humming softly as she wiped down the counters. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to her temple. She leaned back into him with a soft sigh. "You're thoughtful tonight," she murmured. Grant smiled faintly. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we've built here." Emily turned in his arms, her eyes shining as she looked up at him. "We're still building, Grant." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb tracing along her jawline. "I know, and I want to keep building it, with you, for as long as you'll let me." Her throat tightened, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "You're not the man you used to be." "I know," he whispered. "And I'm grateful for that every single day." Sitting on the porch later, under the faint glow of the porch light, Grant watched Emily rock gently on the swing, her legs curled up beneath her. He cleared his throat softly. "Do you ever miss it?" She tilted her head. "Miss what?" "The old life," he said quietly. "The freedom, the power, the glamour." Emily smiled thoughtfully. "I never wanted glamour, Grant. I wanted someone who'd share the little things with me, someone who'd hold my hand when the kids are sick, who'd laugh with me over burnt toast, who'd stay even when things got hard." Grant let out a slow breath, his heart swelling. "And you?" she asked softly, her voice threading into the quiet night. "Do you miss it?" He thought about that, really thought about it. About the boardrooms and mergers, the global deals and elite circles. About the version of himself who had once been defined by ambition, who had measured his worth in numbers and titles. And then he thought about Maya's drawings taped to the fridge, about Eliza's sleepy hugs, about Emily's quiet laughter, the warmth of her hand in his. Grant smiled gently. Not even a little. A week later, Emily watched from the window as Grant knelt in the yard with the girls, helping them plant a small garden. The man she had once feared would never settle down, who had once chosen power over love, was now on his knees in the dirt, patiently guiding small hands as they tucked seeds into the earth. Her heart ached, full and tender. She stepped outside, crossing the yard to them. "Hey," she said softly, crouching beside him. "You're going to ruin those shoes." Grant laughed, brushing dirt from his hands. "They're just shoes." Maya beamed up at her. "Mommy, Daddy says we'll have flowers soon." Emily felt her eyes shimmer. She met Grant's gaze, her heart twisting with gratitude, with love, with quiet, hard-earned joy. "We already do," she whispered. That night, after the house was quiet, Grant sat with Emily on the porch, their fingers intertwined. "I used to think success was about never stopping," he murmured, "about always chasing the next thing." Emily leaned her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes. "And now?" He kissed the top of her head, his voice soft and sure. "Now I know the real success is learning when to stop chasing and just be here." As the stars blinked awake overhead, Grant closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. He had walked away from an empire, but he had built something far greater in its place. A home, a family, a love that asked not for perfection, but for presence. And for the first time in his life, Grant Whitaker was exactly where he wanted to be.